The assumptions that we have about burning fossil fuels causing climate change or increasing climate change. But with us here, as well as Gavin, is now Richard O'Rourke. Richard's the director of ASPO, that's the Association of the Study of Peak Oil. And peak oil is an issue that's really just starting to get a lot of traction. And to give us a bit of an indication of what that is, Richard O'Rourke.
Thanks, Davey. Can you hear me okay? We're told to stand up. It's a hard act to follow Gavin, and he managed to pinch about 80% of what I was going to say, so I finished Orwell's 1984 recently and came across a quote in there. He said that to see what's in front of your nose requires a constant struggle. And I have a suspicion that most people in this room have actually heard of peak oil. Anybody willing to admit that they hadn't heard of peak oil before they heard Gavin? Okay, so you've all heard of it. And that doesn't surprise me. We generally like to preach to ourselves. If I may as well, as continuing Gavin's theme of interactive participation with my audience, is anybody here willing to admit that they're paying a mortgage? Or trying to pay a mortgage? I see two hands go up. The point of that question will hopefully become apparent in a couple of minutes. If I may start about this issue of understanding where we are, and part of the challenge that people like myself, who are advocates trying to educate the general public about problems such as climate change or energy supply, and as Gavin pointed out, we're heavily dependent on fossil fuels, is the what's known as a paradigm, what we consider to be normal. There was a guy called Copernicus. He was the guy who came up with the theory that we go around the sun rather than the other way around. 16th century scientist, father of astronomy. If you may recall, a friend of his, Galileo, was called up in front of the Vatican for teaching that we're going around the sun rather than the other way around. So a whole body of knowledge had grown up that the sun goes around us, and to suggest otherwise could land you in trouble, because what we'd also managed to do is build a whole lot of other beliefs on top of that. Copernicus actually sat on that book for about 20 years. It was published, he saw a pre-publication print just before he died. Fast forward about 200 years to Charles Darwin. You all know the story about him going around the world on the HMS Beagle and coming back and looking at his notes and saying, do you know what, it's very possible that, you know, we've all evolved from the common species and this theory of evolution. He actually also sat on that for 20 years, and it was only published it under pressure from his friends because somebody else was about to publish the same theory and get the credit for it. And again, the issue he had there was the current orthodoxy of the predominant religion of the time was that suggests that the universe wasn't created as it had been described in the book of Genesis would get you into a lot of trouble, and his wife was quite religious. So if that's indicative of the kind of challenges that new ideas face in the face of sort of conventional wisdom of society that we live in, and the more, I suppose, the secular orthodoxy of today is neoclassical economics, which, if you're not familiar, is simply the economics that we're all taught as if it's the normal and the only school of economics. And we've come to believe, according to that school, that the economy can always grow, and that a growing economy is a unquestionably good thing. And as Gavin was pointing out there, that one of the problems that we've not accounted for in our economic or accounting system is the environmental cost of all of this economic growth. What's also not considered in our economic theory is the role of energy and how dependent we are on energy. If you ask a neoclassical economist, and these are the guys who advise our government, by the way, these are the kind of guys you'd find in the ESRI, if you're familiar with them, will say that energy doesn't really matter in the economies. So they're relying on a theory that's, according to other schools, such as the one I belong to, that's fundamentally flawed. They also don't necessarily have a particularly good handle on how our banking system and financial system operate. And we're now in a situation where we're borrowed up to our gills, and a lot of us are only a few in this room, but a few of us are trying to pay mortgages, and If you believe that the economy is going to keep growing and that's going to be the basis for us to repay our loans, then you're fine. But if you look at some of those assumptions and some of the data that those are based on, you'll find that there's a flaw in them, and that the period of energy scarcity that we're heading into is going to make it very, very difficult for us to keep growing the economy and to service those debts. And that obviously puts us in a difficult situation, and it puts us in a very difficult situation if you're trying to talk to somebody who is paying off a car loan, is paying a mortgage, and you're trying to tell them that both of those things are going to be very difficult in the future. They have a very good reason not to want to believe you. So I suppose this is as much to encourage me as to encourage anybody else out there who's feeling it difficult to mainstream some of these ideas, is that you're up against a great degree of inertia. And as my colleague in the back of the room there, Vinay Gupta, if any of you got to capture his talk, he talked about this idea of risk and resilience, that if your government isn't taking the appropriate steps to protect your interests, well then the responsibility falls on you. And you need to do whatever you can to protect your interests. And that obviously involves informing yourself as to what the reality of the world that you're living in is going on, and not just simply accepting the unquestioned orthodoxy that gets doled out all too frequently. And in that regard, events like this and the work that Davy's doing in Cultivate, and there's lots of things that hopefully we'll talk about as a panel today that you can do to help protect yourself and the communities around you as we go into what could well be difficult times. Thanks. Thank you, Richard.